Happy graduation day to James Laurinaitis, his second at Ohio State. He is no longer a GA for the Buckeyes. The legendary Buckeyes linebacker is now a full-time linebackers coach for Ohio State. And Bill Landis, our long Columbus nightmare is over. The staff has been completed. Let's get into all of that on Snap Judgments. They're brought to you by Buyers Auto. The headliner here, there's some contract minutia to work out with the rest of the defensive staff and for Keenan Bailey, but we've waited a long time, and it ended with, I think, an option that many of us forecast, or at least one of us, or both of us, predicted in December. James Laurinaitis being a full-time solution for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, you definitely did, and that draft has been sitting there for a while. You published earlier today when the news was official. So no, we've been waiting for this, and there were times when it seemed like more of a sure thing than at other points, and I do think Ryan Day probably went back and forth a little bit on what exactly was the right course of action, including everything from potentially a second defensive line coach to what he's done here with the linebackers coach to full-time special teams coordinator to trying to combine all that into not to line and linebacker, but to combine a defensive assistant and special teams into one spot. And probably went through some options and talked to some people and has waited until both the college football season and the NFL season have come to an end, and now has but made the decision to promote James Laurinaitis to linebackers coach, and it's not a surprising development, certainly not. But I'd be lying if I said I was 100% certain it would end this way, just kind of given how long this took and kind of how diligent Ryan Day seemed to want to be with it.
Well, we got that question a number of times, right, Bill? Like, what's the holdup? If you have James Laurinaitis on staff, if you wanted to take a swing for Jason Taylor as the second defensive line coach, and that became clear that it wasn't going to work out in this offseason, why not just move on quickly to plan B? I think I have to give credit on multiple fronts here. If I've said since December 1 and throughout that month and throughout January that what Ryan Day has to do in 2024 is maximize opportunities, and he felt like, let's explore, is James Laurinaitis the absolute best way to maximize the linebackers and or the entire staff? If you land a big time swing, whether that's Jason Taylor or somebody else who could be the second defensive line coach and keep Laurinaitis as a GA for another year, that's a good plan A or a viable plan A. If he thought there was some value to going out and interviewing other special teams coaches and having another coordinator and decided that was the right course of action, okay. I mean, it didn't have to just be, this is what I think is best. James went to Ohio State. He's coached linebackers, played linebackers, been in the profession, the great recruiter, wants to be on the road. Like, I think I would have had to say, okay, he spent basically 2.5 months deciding how he wanted to use the last spot on the staff. So if he did wind up at this conclusion that that's what he thinks is best, and all those other things are still true for the value that James Laurinaitis brings to the staff, like, good for Ryan Day. I don't think I could have been upset or criticized if he wound up with option B or C or A or D or 2 or whatever, however you want to decide on them. Like, clearly this was well thought out.
It was, yeah, like frustratingly so at times, I think, but I don't necessarily fault him for it. Like, it's not, it wasn't a coordinator search necessarily. It was the final spot on a staff, and not to minimize the impact of it, but I just think that Ryan Day had time to work with, and he used it. So, and he came to this conclusion, which I think is a perfectly reasonable one, and there are other ones I think that would have been reasonable as well. My preference, honestly, probably would have been to try to find a way to get a second defensive line coach on the staff to make that transition away from Larry Johnson whenever it happens a little bit easier. But I also understand why that is difficult to do, or how that would be difficult to do, and not the easiest sell to whoever you're trying to bring into that job. And it's not to say that people turn it down because of that. I just think it's a little bit of a hard needle to thread. And then this would have been number 2, like I finding another defensive assistant primarily to coach the linebackers and Could Ryan Day have, really scoured the earth to find someone with more experience? James Laurinaitis, certainly. And I think that lack of experience probably played a role in this taking a little longer than maybe we thought it would or hoped it would. But it doesn't mean that James Laurinaitis is going to be bad at this job. Like he checks a lot of boxes, even if he's only been doing this for a couple of years, and this is his first full-time assistant job. And I think we did, we'll have to wait and see, I guess, a little bit on the on-field stuff, right? We got a little bit of a feel for it last year, but I'm not going to judge him so much on that 1 year when he was like in between roles as like a GA and like trying to also be the position coach with Jim Knowles around. Like I'll judge him more fairly, I think, on this year, going into this year as the full-time linebackers coach with like no gray area there. But I also think you've already seen some upside with James the recruiter, right? Kids just seem to respond really well to him, and we did get to see that play out over the last couple of months while he stepped up into that on the road recruiting vacancy that Ohio State had. So I think it's still, I think a lot of people are excited about this. I think a lot of people love it when Buckeyes come home or stay home and help Ohio State build towards winning another championship and build toward beating Michigan again. So this is a good hire. It checks a lot of boxes for Ohio State for sure.
It does, and I think, to be fair about it, you don't have to say objectively it was a slam dunk. There are a lot of reasons, a lot of boxes, as you said, Bill, that are checked by James Laurinaitis. But the reason why did this take so long? I think Ryan Day looks at this, and this goes back to the first time that James Laurinaitis expressed an interest in coaching, and Ryan Day was sort of like, "I don't believe you," and it didn't work out initially, and at Ohio State specifically. And James went to Notre Dame and got his feet wet in the profession, found out that he liked it, showed that he could do a little bit and make an impact. And then Ryan Day is like, okay, well, we can't have you doing that at Notre Dame. Come on back to Columbus. And as you said, like the job itself, like doing the GA work and also coaching the linebackers was a lot to put on his plate. And I think if Ryan Day is evaluating this, and he mentioned this, Day did during his offseason press conference a little over a week ago in the Woody, he was like, well, he's young in the profession. He's only 2 years into it. Like maybe there's somebody else that could bring more experience to the Ohio State coaching staff. And that's why other options are on the table. And James was, not so secretly directly responsible for the linebackers last year. And did Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers have their very best seasons of productivity? I think we'd have to say no, they probably didn't. So all of that plays into the decision-making process, which again is probably why it took the length of time that it did. But the fact that Ryan Day gave it all that thought and weighed what's the risk of losing James Laurinaitis, because other places at the NFL level and in college wanted to hire him, letting someone who can sell Ohio State the way that he can as a recruit, to recruits as a former player, like probably was worth the long-term gamble. And also, if you take some of the GA work off of his plate, does that mean maybe steps forward both as a coach and for the on-field product at linebacker? I guess we're going to find out, but it seems like that's probably a safe wager to make.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. Like those guys do like the cutting up tape and putting like coaching reels together. Like that's a lot of work. It's thankless work, and it's probably boring work, and it's work that takes up time where you'd otherwise just be coaching ball. And now James Laurinaitis gets to give somebody else that work, I guess, which is probably pretty fun. And I'm excited to see how it plays out. We've talked about this a little bit, like with some of the other hires Ryan Day's made, like elevating guys who don't have a ton of experience into important jobs of an important program. Like I'm not in favor of just doing that all the time. But I am okay with the occasional swing, which this is. And I'm certainly okay with the occasional swing when it's with a guy that has as much cachet in the program as James Laurinaitis has. So you're right. It potentially is a little bit of a gamble. There's no guarantee that James Laurinaitis is a slam dunk linebackers coach. And we have had some texters ask that, like, what makes you so sure that he will be? Like, frankly, I'm not. I don't think anybody is. I think Ryan Day believes he can be a good coach. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put him in this position. But like James has to show us that now. And he's worked for that opportunity a couple of years now and demonstrated value to the program, I think, in the 1 year that he has been in that role as a GA. So I'm excited to see how it plays out. I think I would have understood if Ryan Day had gone out and tried to find a more experienced linebackers coach, certainly. I kind of like this a little more just because of like the Buckeye factor of it, right? And I never think you can have too much of that.
Yeah, and it's the long-term upside, right? And I think that's, again, to go into the delay, everything Ryan Day is well aware and more aware than anyone else in the world that he has to win in 2024. And so rushing to like make sure that no one else can hire James Laurinaitis probably would not have been in his best interest. I think the preference all along is find a way to make sure that he doesn't go flourish somewhere else, but also explore. You don't rush in to just hire any second defensive line coach either. If you're trying to replace Larry Johnson, who's one of the most famous position coaches to ever do it for that unit, you're not just going to take anybody to do that either. So if you wanted to take a big swing again on someone like Jason Taylor and it wasn't going to work now, well, you don't just go like find somebody else and settle for that. At this time a year from now, you can go back to Jason Taylor or 2 years, since Larry Johnson just signed a 2-year contract extension, which was a bit surprising to me, but we'll get into that in a moment. You can do that again next year. Or in 2 years' time, you can come back and revisit that. Just trying to find the best of both worlds where you can both keep James Laurinaitis and keep him happy in a role with making a couple $100,000 a year at your alma mater as a GA is not a bad gig. And a lot of the others that may have been offered to him were going to be difficult to match for, even if like you're an SEC school that may have been an opponent in the Cotton Bowl, for example, just off the top of my head, like that's going to be a difficult situation for them to match and offer James Laurinaitis. So anyway, you did have to, I think, turn over every rock if you're Ryan Day. And if you get to the middle of February and decide that this is the right course of action, good. James Laurinaitis didn't miss time on the road. He was able to do that in January. He's not missing winter workouts. He's not going to miss spring ball. And there's still some time there to get rolling. And part of this equation is keeping Larry Johnson around. And I don't know, Bill, if this means he's absolutely going to coach for the next 2 years. I'm out of the prediction business with Larry Johnson because I'm just tired of being proven wrong by somebody who seems to have no thought process whatsoever about life after football.
He just loves ball, man. He can't imagine life without it. So I get it. I wanted to double check on this on the Larry Johnson piece because I think aside from the news that James Laurinaitis is the linebackers coach, I think the thing that people are talking about the most now is there's a number of things here. We can run through the bullet points, but the thing that people are talking about, I think more than anything else, is Larry Johnson 2-year extension through the 2025 season. And he was out of contract. He signed a 1-year deal last year that expired on January 31st. Is that right?
Yes.
What year is it? It's 2024. Yeah. So he needed a new deal. Forgot what year it was for a second. We talked too much. So I'm not surprised that if Larry Johnson needed a new deal and he was clearly going to be the defensive line coach this year, that it is a 2-year deal. Doesn't mean he's going to be here for 2 years, but I think you want to be able to tell recruits that you're going to be here for at least 2 years, right?
Sure.
So I'm not reading too much into that. We'll see what Larry wants to do, or like maybe this is the last year of Larry solo job, and then maybe you find a way to do the 2 defensive line thing next year, depending on what staff openings you might have. I don't know how that could work, but it's almost to me like if you're going to give him 1 year, you kind of have to give him 2, or else you're just going to go through the recruiting cycle with everyone in the world telling you that Larry Johnson's going to retire and you shouldn't go play at Ohio State. So I understand that part of it.
Yeah. All right. And the others, Jim Knowles, after being interviewed for couple jobs and getting a lot of interest, both as to be a head coach and a defensive coordinator by deep-pocketed programs elsewhere. He gets a 2-year extension. Tim Walton gets an extension and a couple fancy new titles, assistant head coach of the secondary and also cornerbacks coach. So I don't know if that changes anything, but that was sort of hinted at throughout the recruiting process that like Tim Walton may have a more prominent role leading the secondary as a whole, but McCrary was also brought in to coach the safety specifically. And then Keenan Bailey getting another year contract extension through 2025 as well. So Ohio State finalizing all of those things and confirming them on Thursday sort of wraps this up and then puts the onus fully on getting ready for spring ball in a little over 2 weeks.
I did not realize this when the release first came out. Larry Johnson's son is now on staff too.
Yeah, I believe he got one of those GA positions, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, he's Tony Johnson. Has joined the staff as a senior analyst. Tony Johnson, who played receiver at Penn State, is now on staff at Ohio State.
Now, this is not the son that's had a lot of critical things to say about the Buckeyes and space lasers.
And space lasers, not Larry Johnson. I don't know what he is actually. Not the very good, formerly very good running back. One of Larry Johnson's other sons, who was actually like a decent receiver, I think, when he was in college. What's going to happen on special teams now? I guess is like before we wrap this up. Like, so he didn't hire a special teams coordinator. So what do we think they're going to do?
I think it's going to be like, so Ryan Day has said that he wants and expects to be more involved in special teams. That will not make him the special teams coordinator. This was not specified by Ohio State on Thursday, but both Matt Guerreri and Keenan Bailey have previous experience working with special teams, including for Keenan directly at Ohio State. So I would imagine that this will be a collaborative effort. It felt like an easy option to, and I guess with the way that they're putting, I guess for lack of a better term, more on Tim Walton's plate, that could free up time for Matt Guerreri and Keenan Bailey working with tight ends. You have a little bit more to spare. That may be a situation where it becomes a collaborative effort and nobody gets the official title. I don't know that for sure. I will certainly be trying to find out as in the days ahead, but at this point, and they also have two other quality control analyst people that are involved, and they will remain in that position. So it has to come from within this group of 10 now and the people already on staff, but nobody is taking over a full-time special teams coordinator spot, which is the end result, which I think I can speak for everybody involved that nobody wanted that for Ohio State.
Are there, I wish I could answer this question. Was Tony Alford also out of contract?
Yes, he was.
And he was not announced today. Is anything going on with him? Like,
what, are you trying to stir up some trouble?
Well, I'm just curious why.
No,
I don't part of the release.
I don't have the answer for that either. Maybe they're still fine-tuning the rest of those details.
Yeah, I suppose they could be.
Because didn't Justin Fry come with a 2-year deal?
I believe he did. Yes, it's probably I think you are correct in that. I'm looking at the coaching contracts as we're talking. Justin Fry's employment agreement was for 2 years. Yeah. So he's also doing a new deal. So I think they just didn't finalize those yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes when you file that paperwork at Ohio State, and it takes a while for the ink to dry, and they'll get to that. Like, I'm surprised we got as much information outside of James Laurinaitis as we did on Thursday, because normally this stuff drags all the way out until April and May till we get contract information. So this is ahead of schedule, and I think it's because Bill, everybody was ready to stop talking about it.
Yeah, well, we're what are we, like 17 days away from the start of spring practice? Like, we deserved clarity on this. I'm glad we got it.
We got it, and it gave us some more snap judgments to dive into. Brought to you by Buyers Auto, and that's it. Don't have to answer those questions, and we can just get back to position previews on the podcast daily and everything else with spring ball just 2.5 weeks away for the Buckeyes. Thanks for joining us on some short notice for some live Snappy Jays. That's Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. We will talk to you later.